Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. But this evening, I'm joined by Erin Moffett, and we will be doing our once a month, a little bit early, but our platform for this show is all things esoteric. And so, Erin, are you there, sister?
I'm there as long as you can hear me fine.
Yeah, I hear you fine. You doing
Excellent.
okay?
Yes, I am, and I'm blessed that I live in Montana, which is pretty far away from most things going on. But I'm also grateful to be here talking to you, and I appreciate you having me on with you.
Yeah, no, I'm honored and looking forward to the discussion. We're going to be covering and talking a little bit about what's going on in the world with all of the killings and protests and the insanity that's happening on the streets with businesses being burned down, cars set afire, and just craziness, especially here in Atlanta. And it seems to escalate that in the evenings after the curfew hour that things get out of hand. And there also seems to be some aspect of somebody somewhere funding and putting um, putting on the streets these provocateurs, and that there are kids that are coming out that are just focused on trying to cause havoc and to destroy as much as they can. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit this evening. And I did a show partially even last night where I talked about this, and I think it's something that should be addressed, and that not a lot of people are able to understand the false left-right paradigm and to make sense of it all. And so I'm going to allow you to kind of lead the discussion, Aaron, and I'll follow you, and and we'll answer questions and whatever you want to bring forth, we'll discuss.
Well, great. Be patient. I hope everybody. There's always a few who might not, but I have my kids, so there may be an interruption or some noise, but they're pretty good, and they're aware that I'm doing. They're aware I'm on a video call right now, and I told them it would be long, so I appreciate all the patience for that. It shouldn't be noisy though. I wanted to mention I was listening to your show from last night, and when you mentioned Hurricane Katrina, I don't know if a lot of people know, and you may because you live down there in Georgia, much closer than I am in Montana. But there was a localized martial law, and there were
Yes.
people that had their firearms taken from them during that.
Right.
And a lot of people, in fact. And I didn't know that because, that was really, it just was the furthest thing from my mind. I was just living my own life, being kind of self-centered, not interested until just this last year when I saw footage, and I didn't know if it was recent. I realized it was Katrina, and I shared it with anyone and everyone. My parents didn't know that people were being disarmed. Now, part of that is people were allowing themselves to be disarmed. But I would tell people in this time to be really mindful and watchful, because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I want to see him try to come into my neighborhood. I want to see him just try. And they have. And people have given up their weapons. Now, I know there might be a few who won't, but I have unfortunately, I think there will be more that will out of fear.
Mm-hmm. Well, they use the pretext of natural disasters to, excuse me, push an agenda that most Americans are not used to. And with regard to Hurricane Katrina, for people that don't know, and I did a series of shows, a 9-part series, because back then I wasn't able to publish in very long durations of time, so I had to do 15-minute segments. But there's you can find a video that I did called When the Levees Break, the Bombing of the Lower Ninth Ward. And it's a 9-part series, and it talks about how the levees were destroyed after the hurricane had passed, and how it was a pretext for establishing martial law and also in decimating posse comitatus, which, for people that don't know, posse comitatus was a law put into place to prevent the U.S. military from being utilized on American soil and to allow the state governments to police and to have a civilian police force on the streets to take care of, establishing law here in the country, which has been beneficial, and there's been purposeful a reason behind trying to keep the military out of the affairs of the nation with regard to the citizenry. And it has to do with tyranny, and that whenever a standing army has been utilized by the powers that be, it has been for overthrowing and establishing a coup. And so this law that was on the books for several hundred years was basically decimated during Hurricane Katrina, and we saw that they put the military private contractors, FEMA, the National Guard, and others, Blackwater especially, out on the streets of America during Hurricane Katrina. And yes, they did push the envelope, so to speak, and went door to door to try to evacuate and also to disarm American citizens. And it was all an effort to see how much they could get away with. And we see that, since that time, this precedent's being set. That's what they are doing even now, that they've also have put on the streets, the National Guard, even though they want to be able to use private contractors and also the U.S. military in times of crisis. And so, in my opinion, that's the pretext for what we're seeing with regard to the riots, and also the reason why the state governments, sheriff's departments, and law enforcement, they are allowing the provocateurs to go insane and to unleash havoc and to burn down, destroy local businesses. And it's all so that later martial law can be declared, and also a crackdown on the citizenry, which I believe will also include an escalation of people getting shot in the country and citizens being arrested, and that we're really just at the beginning of the insanity, in my opinion.
Right, and I think it's interesting that while we're getting very well set up for, it's possible it will be countrywide martial law. Everybody's opinion is different on that, because there are people that think that's not possible because Trump would lose his base. And yet we've got a large group of his base that want martial law. I think there's people, oddly, on the left and the right, some calling for like protests and violence and some not, and some calling for martial law and some not, because that's what Q has been pushing. And I know that some people didn't like that when I mentioned this last time, and I'm sorry that you don't like this, but it might be a conviction when you don't like what you're hearing. Sometimes we have to think about is that a conviction that I don't like it, or is it true discernment? So, consider that. But when the Q drops, if you're not familiar, I know you are familiar now with QAnon, but this is some secret intelligence, possibly military person or people or AI, dropping information that's really not anything we couldn't find on our own, but talking about why we need martial law and why it's good, and getting rid of the deep state during these times. In fact, with the coronavirus going on, they were saying that children were being saved from tunnels. And I don't think that there's any ounce of evidence that any children were being saved. And what's sad is it's using the same tactic that some of these leftist governors are doing. And we'll talk about that in a little while, but I won't jump the gun. But on the basis of helping and saving children is how they get us. And I really think that's kind of how Hitler did it too. And we go, okay, great. This is the savior. This is the salvation of America. And a lot of these people, even, they say they're Christians. And I won't beat a dead horse on a subject we already talked about, but I'll remind people that Q drops a lot of words and sentences and paragraphs that sound very much like Alice Bailey. And Alice Bailey, who was very much like Helena Blavatsky, and who was his teachings were carried on by the likes of Benjamin Krim and David Spangler. These are people that are very Luciferian, maybe not satanic because they believed they were light and love, but it was very New Age Luciferian tactics there, where they believed that things like the atomic bomb were necessary and a beneficent thing to control those who would not go along with their what they called the plan. And it really was called the plan, everybody. And it's been called that for a long time. And you can find these things out with some research, but how would you know? How would you know to look for the plan with Alice Bailey? Well, luckily, there are people who've written books not knowing that they were going to expose this kind of stuff. But for instance, one is called The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow by Constance Cumby. And this has been a wealth of information. And she wrote this in the 80s. She had no idea a military psyop would come out called Q. And so she just talks about the plan. And it's very, 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 very similar to what Q says in many posts. Now, he gets the Christians, or they get the Christians with things like pray and Godspeed. And anyway, I've done a whole video on it. So what I would like to say is they've been able to take these ideas and push a group of people who would normally some still are 3%ers. I'm not going to put down the 3%ers. What I'm trying to say, though, is that there's some people that were part of the 3%ers or the Boogaloo guys, the Boogaloo boys, and they're not going to stand up like they would have possibly with their arms, because they're kind of trusting the plan. So anyway, I don't know how many would be like that, but when you get this group of people supporting martial law that would have never, ever done so, we're really going down a scary path. And like I said, we'll get into what the governors are doing state by state in a little while.
Yeah, with regard to Constance Cumby, I had the great privilege of interviewing her a very long time ago when she was doing interviews. I'm not sure if she still is, but she has been warning about the New Age and those kind of deceptions for a very long time. And the language, because that's always a giveaway. And I think that what you've done on speaking about QAnon, and also in getting people to question source and to not just accept, but to think about and to consider, because for even before I had ever heard of Q, a very long time ago, back in the 80s even, people were pushing NESARA, the National Economic, I forget the exact acronym, but basically like a financial reset and debt forgiveness and all that. And that has been very New Age for very long time. So it was shocking to me that, people in the QAnon movement are talking about this, and that you have a lot of Trump supporters also pushing this whole thing, when again, I've known it to be New Age for well over 2 decades now. But again, it just shows you that, there's nothing new under the sun, and you really have to question and also consider where the roots of certain movements are coming from and how they're being directed, how they're being dictated. And so the times that we're living in are very interesting, considering we just came out of this whole COVID-19 virus quarantine, the social distancing, separation, and then into now these massive protests where people aren't even considering, the whole social distancing, and it seems like everything with the virus has been put in the past. Like people have just forgotten about all that we just recently gone through. And even though I do believe a lot of that was hyped up and it was to kind of shut down and to destroy the economy of certain nations of the world and certain, especially the middle class of different nations, it's done a very good job of affecting small business and those that are not the connected to the larger transnational multi-corporations, which do rule over, as far as the New World Order elite and establishing their rule all in many of these different countries. And so it's going to be interesting to see where we go from here and how things play out. But certainly, I know that you have been looking into some of the deeper aspects of this. And even last night, I talked about how historically, the elites and the powers that be, when driving a certain agenda, they always allow for destruction to happen and then blame it on a certain group as pretext to crack down. Like, for instance, just really quickly, because I did speak about this in great detail last night, but Nero, when he allowed part of Rome, huge parts of Rome, to be burned down and then blame the Christians for having done that particular act and used that as a pretext to crack down on them. And then Hitler did the same thing when he burnt down the Reichstag and then went after his political opponents. And I do believe that, what is being allowed to happen here, and I'm not saying any particular political entity is responsible or orchestrating or allowing this, but I know that according to the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, this is something that has been written about and that they've been wanting to orchestrate a economic crisis, and where there's radical protests on the streets and crackdown. They want actually it to get so chaotic that people are murdering each other, and that's the order out of chaos that they speak about. And so again, this is why it's important for people to become familiar with the Illuminati secret covenant and the protocols and the agenda for them.
There was a man named Yuri Bezmenov that talked about these particular stages that we would go through, and while they're broken down a little bit further, the four main stages are demoralization. And in demoralization, it's a 20-year plan where education is infiltrated, and unions are created. All these things are made where people will have a long time of programming, and you got to start when they're young so that they don't have anything they have to forget or be reprogrammed from. And then there's destabilization, which is the economy is getting upset. And then it goes into chaos. Now, so demoralization is 20 years. Destabilization is 2 to 5 years. And I'm going off of what Yuri Bezmenov said. When he was trained in the KGB, he was a defector from Russia. And he loved America because he loved the freedoms we had. And he came and told the truth. And he was interviewed by G. Edward Griffin in 1984. So interestingly enough, he talks about these stages, and then it gets into chaos, and chaos is very fast. And I remember when I was learning from him, I was not really imagining it was going to happen in my lifetime, but I think that's the stage that we're in right now. It's a 2 to 3 month change out, basically, for the new in his knowledge, it would be a dictator in his understanding, and taking over with Russia. And that would be so that's what we're seeing as a reset. Now, we're not seeing a new dictator necessarily step in, but he talks about in the chaos where the troops take to the streets, that everybody, should probably have their guns taken away by then. And some of us might try to hide out. Well, a lot of us will try to hide out. And as Mr. Binsfagel and I have talked about, is cities of refuge. But it all happens very, very quickly, and then they go into the stage of normalization. And people take that incorrectly. They think that normalization is normalization of all these corrupt things, but really those were all just the useful idiots with the trans agenda and the media and everything. And what they actually do is take all them out too, and then they bring in the new. Everything's going to be like this. This is how it's going to be. And it separates and distributes all wealth, and you have the very, very wealthy, and you have the very, very poor, and that's all there is. And so these stages are very similar to what we've been seeing going on now. I think we're in the stage of chaos. Again, if you missed what I was saying, I was talking about Yuri Bezmenov, the KGB defector, and how he described these, and how I think we're seeing it now. So I wanted to mention that. I think we're really in a place of chaos, and the Jasara Nasara stuff sounds great because it talks about loan forgiveness. It talks about going back to the gold standard, and it looks really, really good. But that's the point. It's supposed to look good to more people than not. And we're supposed to forget what's being done to us, right? We're supposed to just go, that looks great, and everything's so bad. We need somebody to help us. And, whether Trump comes out ahead on the next election or it's somebody else, everybody's going to be looking to that situation as salvation out of this chaos, and they'll almost accept anything because they need some comfort back in their lives. So this is where we're really going to have to step up as a remnant of Christians. I'm talking to everybody here, fellow saints and friends and Christians. This is going to be a time to step up and not, out of fear, do anything we shouldn't do, even if it means our own lives are taken.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have it on the books that there is going to be a time where they're going to bring us into the synagogues, into the places of worship, and that we'll be persecuted for his namesake. And then the whole agenda, it's like in the scriptures, it speaks about the peace and then comes sudden destruction. And certainly we seem to be at that point, that anything could happen at any time to set the dominoes in motion. And so
I can't hear you. Hold on just a second, please stop. Just call. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Every time she whispers, it gets louder and louder.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. Were you finished, or did you want to keep going?
Yeah, no, I'll give you a chance to comment. We're almost to first break anyway, so I'll give you a chance to comment, and then we'll pick it up on the other side.
Well, as I always tell people, this is a prepared, not scared scenario, and even in Little Billings, Montana, up here, we've heard that Antifa might try to come in and cause problems for us, even in Billings, Montana. So it's everywhere. We're all going to be a part of it. But we want, as I tried to share with people today, seriously, hang it up. As I was trying to tell people today, as I warned them that Antifa might be coming into our town, I said, this is not because I want you guys to be afraid. I don't want you to feel like you have to arm up maybe arm up, but I don't want you to feel like that's because we're scared. I said, this is just to prepare you. If you see anything, see something, say something, but we should have no fear. We should rejoice in the Lord and know that anything that's going to happen, we will be with him. And that day will be the wedding day of all wedding days. And if we can remember it like that, then we're not afraid. What we have to know is that our death will actually bring a new eternity with Christ Jesus. That will be the most beautiful thing we couldn't even imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with regard to scriptures, I believe that God and the Word gives us the power to protect ourselves and to defend ourselves against evil, and certainly that families and children and loved ones and your animals. That there's a reason why we have the right to bear arms, and I don't think at all that, certainly we're not to murder, but when it comes to as far as killing the enemy, I think that that has been something that even the Israelites sent into Canaan to wipe out the giants. That this is something that um, in fighting for and defending yourself and your family, there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. All right, we'll be right back.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Hello everybody. As you know, in our Digital Readers Club, we just finished the Great Commission 3 on the end time apocalypses and are now moving forward because of your vote into the Yahushua Christ, the infancy, gospels, early childhood, and lost year narratives. And so in this particular book, and the reason I compiled it is because there's only one account in the entire Bible that relays anything with regard to the youth of Christ. And it is the story of when he's 13 years old and he leaves Mary and Joseph, and they, retracing their steps, find him teaching the rabbis and the elders in the Holy Temple, the Jerusalem Temple, about the mysteries of the heavens. And so I wanted those of us that are believers and that hold and have faith in Christ to have the fullness of the stories and the accounts of his early life that are available to those that wish to know more. And so that was the reason for the compilation of all of these accounts, is to give you better insight into who our Savior Messiah is, and how he was, even in his youth, without question, he was the fullness, the incarnation of God, and that he had the authority, even then, of life and death, and that Mary used even his bathwater and his swaddling clothes to heal leprosy and to bring people out of their demonic possessions. And so I believe that the study of this material will greatly bless your life and help you to better understand the core tenets of why we believe on him and know without question that salvation is through him.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for a second portion. I wanted to share something about the snake of Judaism that is part of the protocols and the notes on the opening of this particular text. It says, as history developed, this scheme was worked out in detail and completed by men who were subsequently initiated in this question of how to set a peaceful conquest of the whole universe by Zion. These learned men decided by peaceful means to conquer the world for Zion with the slyness of the symbolic snake, whose head was to represent those who have been initiated into the plans of the Jewish administration, and the body of the snake to represent the Jewish people. The administration was always kept secret, even from the Jewish nation itself. As this snake penetrated into the hearts of the nations which it encountered, it undermined and devoured all the non Jewish power of these states. It is foretold that the snake has still to finish its work, strictly adhering to the design plan until the course which it has to run is closed by the return of its head to Zion, and until by this means the snake has completed its round of Europe and has encircled it, and until by dint of enchaining Europe it has encompassed the whole world. This it is to accomplish by using every endeavor to subdue the other countries by an economic conquest. The return of the head of the snake of Zion can only be accomplished after the power of all the sovereigns of Europe has been laid low. That is to say, when by means of economic crisis and wholesale destruction affected everywhere, there shall have been brought about a spiritual demoralization and a moral corruption, chiefly with the assistance of Jewish women masquerading as French, Italian, etc. These are the surest spreaders of licentiousness into the lives of the leading men at the heads of these nations. Now, of course, this is when it was all focused on Europe, but this has basically been expanded worldwide, and that they have been utilizing provocateurs in all of the different nations, and also in funding what seems to be, the liberalism, the movements to guarantee freedoms and citizens' rights. That this has also been a dog and pony show in order to drive a particular agenda. And so, all throughout these protocols, it speaks about this, which is interesting that, they use a snake as a symbolism for establishing this order and this agenda in the same manner that we see on our dollar bill. You have the pyramid with the disjointed capstone, the eye at the top of this Illuminati pyramid. I believe that, the body of the pyramid represents the workers, the foot soldiers, the henchmen, those that take the blood oaths to support and to serve their father, the devil. And then we see that the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness are at the tops, leading and guiding and continuing their ongoing war in, with the Most High God, and also the enmity between these two seed lines as it plays out. And reading again through the protocols, you see that they there's a specific time when an economic crisis will be brought forth to ring the bell, to sound the alarm, and to bring all of the others, agents and the people associated in affiliation to these secret societies, and that have the insider know-how to know that this is the, the alarm bell to get into motion and to, basically spill blood on the streets. That's where I think we are. And I think it's clear that this is the way it's playing out. Erin?
Exactly right. And, there's been kind of sad because it's always been these, earth, love the earth, do good in the world, have peace type of groups that are created out of these New Age movements that do wish to see a lower population. And I never understood that to the extent I understand it now, even just, till recently, especially reading Constant Cumby's book and how cool it must have been to be able to interview her. And interestingly, all these going back forever, all these, way before Green New Deal, but all these things going back to the 80s or earlier, all the climate change stuff, it's always been someone that you can point to that's part of this New Age movement to eradicate most of humanity for the good of the earth. And yeah, so anyway, we see lots of movies that can even point to that. When you were talking about groups being utilized and infiltrated as well, one of the things I wanted to mention to people so that they're aware, and I'm sure people will not be surprised by this, but there are many Christians who have just sided with the Black Lives Matter group. And I like I said, some people will not be surprised by some of these names, and some people might be, I'm not sure. But I'm just going to read the names and then talk a little bit about that. John, I'm not sure who John Hagee is, or Hagee, but it's Hagee. Paula White, who is
preacher.
Yeah, I figured. But Paula White, who is Trump's Christian advisor. Kenneth Copeland, who, if you haven't seen Satan in that man's face, you're just not looking at him. That guy is so creepy. Joel Osteen, who seems obvious. Joseph Prince, Creflo Dollar, John Bevere, Beth Moore. This is too bad. This guy's name is Jerry Savelle, but sounds like Jimmy Savile. Jerry Savelle, I think Jeanette's Franklin, Bill Winston, T.D. Jakes, Hillsong Church, Church by the Glades, Matt Redman, Chris Tomlin, Priscilla Shire, and Tony Evans, who is Priscilla Shire's father. And so that's not surprising because Tony Evans is a promoter of Kirk Franklin, who wears lipstick in his videos and just preaches a very interesting gospel, has a lot of purple around him, has hexagonal images around him often. TDJ seems obvious. Hillsong is something that people will argue, and I'm not sure they would hear, but people love Hillsong. They love their music. They just love everything about them. And they have a pastor who wears shirts that I've seen him. He has a shirt from a band that's a literal Satan worshiping band that he wears on stage. And he wears the clothing of a witch and Satanist. And I guess that's okay with a lot of people. They don't seem to mind. But Hillsong is super questionable. Beth Moore, I've definitely questioned. And but anyway, I think that a lot of these names are not surprising. But if people are surprised by any of those names, we should talk. I mean, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it now, but we should talk about knowing them by their fruits and looking at their connections. And a lot of their connections are to businesses or companies or big names that are paying them a lot of money. And again, like I had to tell somebody today, even a broken clock is right twice a day. They can sell a lot of truth, but they're selling an even bigger lie. And we really have to break down. I get tired of it too some days. I'm not trying to point out the apostasy on everybody in the world sometimes because I get tired from it, because it just seems like nobody's trying to be a good Christian some days. And when it comes to musicians I've loved, I've had to expose musicians I was moved by at one point, and I didn't want to believe, but the thing is, the truth is the truth, and we can't run away from it. Or if we do, we could lose our soul. So I just wanted to mention some of those in case there was any surprises for anyone. There'd be something you can certainly talk to me more about if you want to email me at ladyliberty@countermail.com. Again, I'm not trying to, I don't know their hearts, but you can know them by their fruits, and there's certainly a lot to be concerned about, and even just backing this particular movement right now.
Yeah, when you start to examine and look at some of the, the people that at the top, and suddenly the players that a lot of people respect and look to, they always seem to have questionable connections. Um, and especially a lot of the TV evangelists, certainly that Kenneth Copeland, I've seen him flash the 666 more often, and people have taken photos of him doing such multiple times in his TV programming, and so. But as far as like Joel Osteen, he seems to have a lot of New Age leanings, and there seems to be a lot of that now. A movement in the church to accept all of the different religions and to bring them all under one umbrella, and that they are working in league with some of the different aspects of the Roman Catholic Church to unite a lot of again the different individuals and groups, and all under a New Age umbrella of one religion, one world economic political entity. And that certainly seems to be the modus operandi also of what they are trying to establish with the coming reign of the Antichrist, and that the beast kingdom has this tolerance and acceptance built into it, of just really turning things upside down with regard to the definitions of good and evil. And for those that aren't familiar with Alice Bailey's the 10-point plan for destroying Christian values and the family and the faith and of the forefathers of this particular country and the people that had grown up generations ago, things are completely flipped upside down now. And it speaks about in this plan that they would utilize the rights, children's rights even, to drive an agenda to where, like transgender, bestiality, even homosexuality, bisexuality, that these things would become normalized, and that they would teach it publicly to the children in even going to elementary school. And we see this coming into play. That I saw a lady talking about how, and she was a teacher, and she was talking about the readings and the books that were being promoted by this, I forget the name of this, this particular system of teaching that all of the schools are having to accept. But anyways, she was talking about how one of the books for the young adolescent teens was a book that encouraged the children, especially the girls, the young girls, to have affairs with their teachers, and things of that nature. And then again with the whole thing of normalizing abomination, that this is certainly part of the agenda, and that it is working on levels, and parents aren't even aware. They have no idea that this kind of thing is being taught to their children, and at even younger and younger ages. And so it's, really it's not even like choice. It's just normalizing it for all these young kids, and they don't know different or better. And so that's what's happening on a lot of different levels. We're being bombarded and attacked, and Things are being changed and twisted to such degree that, what is good, what is evil anymore.
It has certainly been difficult for me even to reprogram, which I'm still doing. We're always still reprogramming, I think, to some degree, or else I guess we'd be there, right? We'd be perfect because we're not there. But in a lot of this reprogramming, I have to look back at what I was taught and what it made me believe and how it made me believe, and that it's skewed, the violence and things like that. I used to love scary horror movies and scary books, and I used to read Stephen King things, and I really enjoyed them. I used to read Clive Barker a lot too, and I thought I was just so intelligent to read these really, kind of difficultly written books that were hard for most people to even stomach, and yet here I'm like, well, I'm like a step above or something. I've had to reprogram even the violence and getting used to that sort of thing, especially when I came to this kind of research that I've been doing, because you can go down these very dark rabbit holes, and you could. Now I'm going to say this, people, I pray you understand. I've had moments where I almost want to see more. I almost want to hear something bad. I want to hear something bad happening to somebody, and you have to quickly go, that's not from Jesus. And I've had those moments where I have to change it, and I have to stop whatever I'm looking at and pray the full armor, because you can get sucked into not only a despair, but a desire for this sickening stuff if you're not careful. So especially with the programming we've had over our lives with violence. And I assume that we're probably fairly close to a break, but I will want to mention, when you talked about some of the Jewish stuff, and kind of some of the behind the scene thing, I think we'll get to this point where we'll talk about that this violence that's erupting seems like it's pushed coronavirus to the back burner. Mm-hmm. And in a way it has. But while that's been going on, and while this is going on, you guys might be surprised to know that your governors and our representatives are up to the president are passing new laws, and they're suspending others. And they're putting us in situations we're not even aware of because we're so focused. People are still wearing masks here. People are still concerned about wearing gloves and masks and wearing them in their cars, because they're not thinking, or maybe it's just virtue signaling. But while they're still doing that, other riots are going on, and it could show up here. They've threatened to come to Billings, Montana. And if that happens, it's just more time to get a lot of stuff done that we're not even looking into, because it wouldn't even occur to us. Now, luckily, there are some people that are looking into these things, but we want to make sure that more people are aware, more and more people.
Well, these are certainly strange times, and people are having difficulty making sense of what's going on in the world, especially those that have not looked into or even begun their study into the aspects of the New World Order and the agenda for world government and domination, police state tyranny, all of this stuff. And so it's new, and they're being forced to consider things they never have previously. And we do still have about 7-8 minutes before break. So if you want to go into the stuff with the governors, feel free.
Yeah, well, let's start with what Trump has gotten done. Now, it sure seems like there's a lot of fighting with Donald Trump and Congress, and it seems like there's just not anything that they could possibly agree on. But you'll be possibly interested in knowing that on May 29th, 2020, Trump signs the Never Again Holocaust Education Bill into law. And since we have a few minutes, I'll just read some of this, and then maybe we can discuss on the other side. But
Sounds
U.S.
good.
President Donald Trump signed into law on Thursday legislation to allocate $10 million in federal funding over the next 5 years to further Holocaust education. So as I read this, I think you're going to really understand what they're doing. I'm going to skip a paragraph and then go on to say that the bill garnered bipartisan support in the House of Representatives with 302 co-sponsors and passed by a vote of 393 to 5 on Holocaust Remembrance Day. in January. The Senate then unanimously passed the legislation on May 13th, sending it to the president's desk. Trump signing the measure into law comes as anti-Semitic incidents are soaring in the United States. Oh, are they? I mean, earlier this month, the Anti-Defamation League released new data showing 2019 had 2,107 anti-Semitic incidents, more than any other year since the age group began compiling such data in 1979. Those incidents included 61 physical assault cases, 1,200 instances of harassment, 919 acts of vandalism. At the time, the Anti-Defamation League head Jonathan Greenblatt called political leaders and elected officials to forcefully confront anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. Trump was heavily criticized in 2017 when he said that very good people were marching alongside neo-Nazis in a white supremacist rally. In Charlottesville, the president's embrace of the Never Again Education Act was praised by Jewish and pro-Israel groups who supported the legislation. The new law will funnel more money into the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and require the museum to develop and disseminate accurate and reliable resources to improve awareness and understanding of the Holocaust. And the funding will also go toward a website managed by the Holocaust Museum, where educators nationwide can find curriculum materials. This is great. A major study in January showed that most adults in the United States possess a general understanding of the Holocaust, but many do not know basic facts about Nazi Germany's slaughter of European Jews. A survey said that the majority of American adults do not know that approximately 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, or that the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler came to power via democratic elections. So that's really the end of it, except for some quotes. But you know what really stood out to me is a few things, and then I'll let you say whatever you want, or we can go about on the other side. But what I wanted to point out was this is a control of education and teaching, and they're disseminating this just like they would to the media when the media was controlling everything. And so while we're looking here, not there, they pretty much unanimously agreed, almost unanimously in the House and completely unanimously in the Senate on this bill. And that's insane to me. This is a time where nobody is paying attention. Because I thought they hated each other. I mean, I didn't think they would want anything that the other side agreed on. And they even joke that if Donald Trump cured cancer, that they'd go against it. Well, it turns out in certain instances, it doesn't matter what it is. They're going to come together on it. And isn't it crazy that it happens to be $10 million towards a Holocaust education bill?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to me like, it was on the Education Day, I believe, that they passed and put together all the Noahide laws and made them quietly into effect. And they're just sitting on the books in all the states and waiting for a time where they'll be used. And it's always that way, that they establish the agenda years and years in advance in order to be able to, when they need to pull it out and to go ahead and start the crackdown. And that's, even like with all the thing with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and how they utterly failed during, the whole thing of Hurricane Katrina, which all that was, they did that purposely in order to allow, things again to get out of hand, that they're not there really to help people, even though they get paid all this money and they have all the emergency funds for assisting states and people with natural disasters. But more so, they're about controlling the dollars that are allocated for, supposedly for use during those particular times. And it's difficult for people to gain access. And even like with the FEMA trailers that were given out during Hurricane Katrina, they were laced in formaldehyde and caused many children to have asthma and breathing problems. And many of them even died because of this toxins that were found within the interior of the trailers, and they had to have been sprayed down. I mean, purposely, because each one of them was found to have residuals of, these toxins, um, all laced in the interior of these particular trailers. And so this agency certainly doesn't have a good track record and certainly does not deserve respect when it comes to aiding and helping American citizens in a time of tragedy, which is why you don't want to have to lean on them for assistance. All right, we'll be right back, everyone.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Hello everybody. As you know, in our Digital Readers Club, we just finished the Great Commission 3 on the end time apocalypses and are now moving forward because of your vote into the Yahushua Christ, the infancy, gospels, early childhood, and lost year narratives. And so in this particular book, and the reason I compiled it is because there's only one account in the entire Bible that relays anything with regard to the youth of Christ. And it is the story of when he's 13 years old and he leaves Mary and Joseph, and they, retracing their steps, find him teaching the rabbis and the elders in the Holy Temple, the Jerusalem Temple, about the mysteries of the heavens. And so I wanted those of us that are believers and that hold and have faith in Christ to have the fullness of the stories and the accounts of his early life that are available to those that wish to know more. And so that was the reason for the compilation of all of these accounts, is to give you better insight into who our Savior Messiah is and how he was, even in his youth, without question, he was the fullness, the incarnation of God, and that he had the authority even then of life and death, and that Mary used even his bathwater and his swaddling clothes to heal leprosy and to bring people out of their demonic possessions. And so I believe that the study of this material will greatly bless your life and help you to better understand the core tenets of why we believe on him and know without question that salvation is through him. Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Of you taking the time to join us this evening. But even with what we heard on the news break, talking about the crackdown and the attacks on police officers, I think this is also part of the agenda because, as I said, they want the citizenry to be so outraged. And we know that, a lot of people are, especially now, having been out of work for very long time, and many of them being on unemployment. Who knows how long that's going to last? But people are desperate, and right now they're with this whole thing of being and staying at home and nobody going out and interacting. There's a lot of pent up energy, and there are aspects of the youth which just want to go nuts. They just want to go crazy. They want to um, get postal and attack and destroy and maim and murder. And it's unfortunate, but that's what we're contending with. That's what we're dealing with. And so, just as there was, I think it was like a year or so back when there was a lot of a lot of people, like even the individual that was choked to death. I believe this was in New York City as well. This gentleman who was simply selling cigarettes outside of this particular business and had permission to do so by the owner of the business, and yet the police came in and there was like 5 of them, and they were choking him, and one of them had him in an arm lock around his head, a headlock, and they choked and murdered him, killed him. And at that time, there was a crackdown against police officers just everywhere. And there was that one shooting, I believe it was in Dallas, where some ex-military individual, a sniper, he just started shooting police officers randomly. And I think he killed like 6 on-duty police officers that night, something of that nature. But there was a crackdown and, again, random attacks against police officers across the country. And of course, I'm not in any way condoning what was done to this particular individual, George Floyd, or to the others that have been killed. I definitely think that, there's a movement towards brutality, and that the police even have been militarized to some degree. And because of that, there's a brutalization that comes with that whole militarization of the police force. And it's unfortunate, but the thing of it is that not only the citizens are in fear and are cracking down against the police, but the police are also in fear and cracking down against the citizens. And so it's just not a good thing. And I just see things escalating and getting out of hand because of the desperate measures of not just the citizenry, because all these people out of work, and then a lot of people that are depressed and suffering post-traumatic stress or whatever, and a lot of them are on medications as well. That doesn't make them capable of handling their stress in a good manner. And then also we see that, a lot of police forces and a lot of the deputies and the sheriff's departments across the country, they're underfunded and undermanned, and that they're trying to ensure protection for large communities, and there's just not enough money for them. And then even the money that is assigned, a lot of times, a lot of it is being embezzled, as is the case with city governments. There's always a level of corruption, unfortunately, that seems to be built into the system, and people in office, they take advantage of their connections and their ability to control budgets, and it's the police officers, the firefighters, and those that are on the front line that suffer, that are not getting the proper equipment to protect themselves and to do their jobs. And so, I mean, I can't imagine. Erin?
Well, just to speak on this a little bit, yes, I will. I want to just kind of push back on. I'm not saying. Well, I don't know if it's pushing back is the right word, but what happened with this guy, George Floyd, is so weird because you've got officers that are actually under protocol doing an approved method to restrain somebody. The guy was huge. He was on meth and fentanyl. But the real kicker, one of the kickers is that when he's picked up by ambulance, it's not medical responders, it's police with vests on. At least that's what they look like. I've never known any EMTs that wear bulletproof vests. And I know a lot of EMTs were speaking out and medics saying that that's not how it works. But the real fun kicker is he tested positive for COVID-19 on his autopsy. So it's
that's what they say. Yeah.
So sadly, I have, when you're trying to red pill your friends and family, I have a friend that's come a long way, and we've been able to talk way more about stuff than we've ever had, because the first time I said something to her, I think I said Tom Hanks was a pedophile, she flipped out and just couldn't handle it. And we almost broke up as friends, but we came back together, and I've just been very, very carefully over time trying to talk to her about these things. But unfortunately, this is one of those that she won't even talk about. We were kind of talking about the economy being destroyed because this is working. I mean, I felt really bad for the guy at first too, and I don't really feel badly for him anymore, learning about who he really is and knowing by their fruits. I'm not saying he deserved to die the way he did if he's truly dead. What I'm saying is I felt badly that it was what I was shown that it was, that I believed what I saw. And then when all the rest comes out, you find out that it's not that at all. But kind of interesting, because I tried to explain to her how he was, full of meth and fentanyl and marijuana. And she goes, I'm not going there with that conversation. So we still have a lot of people who see that, they believe what it is, and for some reason they have to believe what it is. So she's come all this way, willing to talk to me about all these things. And so speaking on what you were saying, it's trying to have the conversation with just our friends and family first. And then, of course, all of the people here, because they're really much more willing to listen. But trying to protect and save the people that we love, and yet these things happen and it affects them, and they won't have the conversation. And so I'm at this point where I go, where I say to myself, how much do I push my concerns onto my friends and family right now? I mean, I felt kind of weird telling my gals that I work out at the gym with to be, aware of Antifa possibly coming to town. I was like, are they going to think I'm crazy? Well, great thing is a couple of them messaged me and said they had been talking about it themselves. So thank you, Jesus. But if we're getting to a point now, how do we warn our family members or friends against some of this stuff? And the next thing that we're going to have to start looking back at while we're looking at the riots, there's still governors that are allowed to implement these local martial law scenarios where they're able to suspend laws. And so if you didn't have any more to say on that, or if you have something to say on what I just talked about, go ahead, Zen. Otherwise, I'll move on to what the governors are doing in our states.
Well, I want you to elaborate on Antifa, but I wanted to tell a story. I just received earlier a letter from a lady, one of the one of my longtime listeners, and she was describing this individual that lives in Las Vegas and how they had seen that the Antifa people were targeting their community, and that they had put on their message board that they were heading there and that they were going to cause chaos and sabotage this area, and set the place on fire. And so the citizens, in reading and seeing this and becoming aware, they organized and they got together like a neighborhood watch. And these people were very well armed, and in coming together, they, basically had a show of force. And these Antifa, this group, they backed down, and they recognized that this was not going to be a community that was just going to sit back and allow them to destroy it and to come in there and target, and because they're doing home invasions. No, they're not just tossing bricks, but they're setting houses on fire, Molotov cocktails, and vehicles and people's residences, and just all kind of insanity. And so the community, they were not going to just sit back and take it. And they had the police officers come in, and they were not going to protect their neighborhood. They just asked them, what was going on and what they were aware of. And, they basically told them about how they were prepared, and that they were going to protect themselves, and that they were going to keep their properties and their houses and from being targeted by these groups and these individuals. And so, they were able to keep this element out of their neighborhood and from destroying it. But, how many others are out there that are willing? Because again, you're having a lot of people that are not ready for this kind of chaos, and that are not willing to take a stand. Because, certainly I have no problem at all with protests, and have been involved in my own life when I was politically active in protesting against government and certain agendas, and the funding of nursing homes instead of community-based services, things of that nature. But there's a lot of people that are not willing to become and get politically active, and because of that, they are victims. They have a victim mentality, and they will be targeted and treated as such. And so that's why you see across the board in many states just huge communities being burnt to the ground and leveled in destruction. And it's unfortunate that the governments are allowing these kind of things to perpetuate themselves. But again, it's to drive a deeper agenda. And we'll see how that plays out over the next weeks and months.
When you were saying you wanted me to kind of go on more about Antifa, did you mean like what I meant as far as warning my friends and family?
Well, that, and just if you've looked into who they are as a group.
Oh, right. And, yes.
What they are and all that.
Well, and you can see now that they're not just a gang of misfits. They're actually coordinated effort, like a business. They even interview people, and they have prospecting like a bike club, or you could say gang might do, whether you want to call them a club or a gang, depends on their activities, I suppose. But this prospecting thing is a training. It's a kind of like even military way of breaking people down and building them up into your way of thinking, although a lot of people are already kind of thinking like them anyway. But it's pushing violent activities to get away with violent activities, We're learning that there's police that are Antifa friendly that are going to allow some of these violent activities, and we don't know who they are. We're not going to know who those people are, whether the cops are going to be for us or against us. And while we're in the state of Montana, we do have a Montana militia that is certainly well armed, and probably they're not going to go over well if they do come here. It would be interesting to see. But yeah, I've been trying to warn family and friends, and I did have a friend that messaged me and said, you know, her and her husband were talking about this. She said, we've been talking about this, and he doesn't think it's real that they're going to come. Now, I don't know if she meant he doesn't think it's real that they're going to come and cause violence, or he doesn't think they're a real group. But it's almost one of these, how much do I ask? How much do I push this? Because unfortunately, I don't want to push them further away from my warning. I just was, so I said, well, maybe they're not going to come. Maybe it's not true. But let's just be prepared in our minds and maybe steer clear of some of the downtown areas over the times that they're saying they might be here, especially if you're not armed. But they are a literal company, a group intent on hiring and training, and I would say that they're more like, I think you could get RICO involved at this point, because they're like a bike gang, the way they prospect, and they're trained to cause violent attacks in ways that aren't easy to get caught. They talk about gouging out people's eyes in the best way. So I'm sure they teach about how to throw bricks properly, how to start fires properly, how to set some of these police cars on fire in the best way. So again, I just they're trained, they're brutal, they're terrifying in that way. However, they rarely have weapons like guns, and so I think that it's something that would be easily fixed if we came out in mass with our firearms. So I did warn any family members that did have arms to maybe consider arming up over the weekend.
Yeah, that takes me to something else I wanted to bring up. And that has to do with the Democrats' bill. I don't know if you've seen this or heard about this. That would increase taxes on firearms and ammunition. And we're talking like hefty penalties, like 50% the taxes on guns and ammo. Have you seen that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
It's HR 5717.
Okay.
All right,
that doesn't surprise me at all that they would be trying to do that, but just because like red flag and bump stock laws are the beginning of some of this.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up the article, but this video is in the way here. Well, anyways, I'll turn it back over to you, and then I'm going to find a better article where I can share this with everybody, because this is insane. And if people don't have guns and firearms to protect themselves, you should definitely consider getting some before this takes place. Let me see. Go ahead, Erin. I'll let you, if you wanted to cover anything else in particular, and I'll try to get a copy of this article here and share it with people.
Well, what I learned today was, and I did just learn this today, is that in a nearby state to me, which is Idaho, which is right next door, there is a Governor Little, and Governor Little is doing certain horrible things. But what had happened, and you can find this by a man named Ammon Bundy, Ammon Bundy, who really has a small channel, but this video has gone viral about the Children's Emergency Quarantine Centers, and God bless him. I'm so glad that it has. And then he's done a follow-up video after that. But just to give people a general idea that while we may be forgetting about coronavirus, our governors are not. And they even have like a governors I don't know where they convene, but right now, but I'm sure it's a lot online where they share information and make decisions together. even in some of these red states like Montana and Idaho, and even in these areas where you think there's a lot of gun owners, there's a lot of 2A people, First Amendment people, and yet we have a Democratic governor by the name of Bullock, and Idaho does too. And so it's really interesting how Trump has allowed our governors to take over. And you might tell me, well, that's just how it's been written all this time, but it's very timely that we're in a position where Trump gives control to the governors of each state, and even our red states, a lot of them are Democrat run when it comes to governors. So in Idaho, the government website accidentally put up a job openings type of website that was talking about children's emergency quarantine camps, and that these children's emergency quarantine centers, that they were going to be housing children who were either testing positive or exposed to somebody who tested positive. And that kind of sounds creepy already just by itself. But then when you find out, and if you go to Ammon Bundy's video on YouTube, he gives the links for all these, but he also shows the websites and the certain laws that are being suppressed. But where it really gets creepy is that they are suppressing laws where where people would get training to take care of these children. So you no longer have to have any certain amount of training to be watching over these children. There's no limit to how many caretakers there are to children. So in most cities, it's 6 children to 1 caretaker is the law. He's suppressing that law. He's suppressing the law of requirement for private toilets and showers. And so they would have to share toilets and showers. And so what Ammon Bundy does is he explains how he was in prison or jail, but he was acquitted, probably jail more like than prison. He was acquitted of whatever it was he was charged with, but he did serve time. And he explained that what it sounds like is what he lived through, where you had shared toilets, you had shared showers, even if it wasn't just boys and girls, but that, it was men. But the point is everything you were exposed when you used the bathroom. Obviously, there's no limit to how many prisoners you might put in unless it's coronavirus. But don't you think it's interesting how they obviously let certain prisoners out, and now we're having riots? It just seems also very timely. But basically what it sounds like, these emergency children's quarantine camps are internment camps, literally just for children, and that that while he's suspending these laws that sound odd at first, when you think about it, it's going to be a place where they're going to house a bunch of children. They're not going to need a lot of caretakers because they suspended that. Nobody needs to be trained, and they're going to have to use bathrooms and shower in front of each other, just like a prison or an internment camp.
Yeah, that sounds a lot shady. Even with, when they did the YDCs, when they made them, privatized them, there was a lot of illegal activity that was going on in these youth development centers, in youth detention centers. And unfortunate, a lot of people, those that were housed there, even the judges were being paid off by these particular, by the industry themselves to sentence kids to these private for-profit institutions, these prison systems. And again, there was a lot of criminality going on there, and a lot of judges were indicted for, again, sentencing kids to these particular places. But and so it's crazy because even when we went into Iraq, there were these kind of facilities for children established, for those that were separated from their terrorist parents, and that they, for whatever reason, they are always trying to set up. And I think it's personally for the trafficking, that they are involved in trafficking kids and putting them into the whole pedophilia system that always seems to be a dominant theme in the things that the global elite are doing and involved in. But anyways, let me share with you this particular article. It says the claim HR 5717 would implement a 30% tax on all gun sales and 50% tax on all ammunition sales. Representative Hank Johnson, a Democrat from Georgia, introduced in January HR 5717, a bill that would strengthen measures to prevent gun violence. It has evoked mixed reactions from the public and moved to the forefront of conversations surrounding legislation not related to the coronavirus pandemic. Oh, wow. All right, we'll be right back for final segment. That was quick.
Hello, everybody. As you know, in our Digital Readers Club, we just finished the Great Commission 3 on the end time apocalypses and are now moving forward because of your vote into the Yahushua Christ, the infancy, gospels, early childhood, and lost year narratives. And so, in this particular book, and the reason I compiled it is because there's only one account in the entire Bible that relays anything with regard to the youth of Christ. And it is the story of when he's 13 years old and he leaves Mary and Joseph, and they, retracing their steps, find him teaching the rabbis and the elders in the Holy Temple, the Jerusalem Temple, about the mysteries of the heavens. And so I wanted those of us that are believers and that hold and have faith in Christ to have the fullness of the stories and the accounts of his early life that are available to those that wish to know more. And so that was the reason for the compilation of all of these accounts, is to give you better insight into who our Savior Messiah is and how he was, even in his youth, without question, he was the fullness, the incarnation of God, and that he had the authority even then of life and death, and that Mary used even his bathwater and his swaddling clothes to heal leprosy and to bring people out of their demonic possessions. And so I believe that the study of this material will greatly bless your life and help you to better understand the core tenets of why we believe on him and know without question that salvation is through him.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Final segment that portion went by very quickly, but I want to finish with this article, and then I'll get you to comment, Erin, and then we'll move into whatever you want to cover for the last segment. A Facebook user made a post in late April calling the bill known as the Gun Violence Prevention and Community Safety Act of 2020 tyranny. The user said the bill will add 30% tax on all guns and 50% on all ammo. What H.R. 5717 would change if passed. The bill's intent is to end the epidemic of gun violence and build safer communities by strengthening federal firearm laws and supporting gun violence research, intervention, and prevention initiatives, as stated in its introduction. If passed, it would, among other measures, require individuals to obtain a license to possess firearms, raise the minimum age for purchasing firearms, and require law enforcement be notified when an individual does not pass a background check. Senator Elizabeth Warren, a Massachusetts Democrat, introduced in February a companion bill, S. 3254. Both proposals aim to restrict the class of firearms banned from 1994 to 2004 under a federal law that expired. Companion bills are meant to promote simultaneous consideration of a measure, according to the Senate. Section 803 of Johnson's H.R. 5717 details the changes that would be made to taxes on firearms and other related items. It would make pistols, revolvers, and other firearms taxable at 30%. Shells and cartridges would be taxable at 50%. In the U.S. Code, a firearm is defined as any weapon, including a starter gun, which will expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. The frame or receiver of any such weapon, any firearm muffler or firearm silencer, or any destructive device. Destructive devices are bombs, grenades, rockets, missiles, mines, or similar instruments. Ammunition consists of multiple subcomponents: bullets, cartridge cases, powder, primers, designed to be used in a firearm according to federal law. Andy Phelan, communications director for Johnson, said the legislation would increase taxes on all ammunition, which is commonly referred to as shells and cartridges in policy. 39% of the money collected from the taxes would be put toward research on and progress for gun violence prevention. The legislation does not specify how the funds would be allocated or where the other 61% of the money would go. So, again, and I'm just going to stop there, but basically, when it comes to having a high crime environment, criminals don't go through the whole process of getting firearms legally. It's only the citizens that suffer. And if you're not able to get a firearm to protect yourself in times of major chaos, well, then it's going to be you that is at risk. And then if they set up a thing where, you have to wait a certain period of time because of a background check in order to be able to purchase your firearm, or with this 50% tax, I mean, that's, for a lot of people, that's going to be several $100s on each firearm. And if you're not in possession of one of them now, with people that are out of work and don't have money to even buy food, where are they going to be able to get the discretionary funds to even purchase something like a handgun or a pistol? And so, again, I think it's all part of even the agenda of what they've done in places like Australia, where the citizens don't have the right to bear arms. And, the criminals, whenever they want, and they want to attack and destroy and rape, pillage, and plunder, they can do so easily because they don't have to worry about any repercussions from anybody that is not law enforcement. Erin?
Yeah, so I've got a few things. I even made some notes so I wouldn't forget, because as you're reading it, I thought of a few things. It's interesting that some of these people, you say Senator Warren, how many people have even thought about her since she dropped out of the presidential race, and how many people remember, and I'm talking about myself here, I forgot, right? This is working on me. How many people even remember she's still in the Senate, still part of Congress, doing these things, like putting these bills on the table, whether they pass or not, we don't know yet. But you forget, it's almost like they put these people out there and then you forget about them because they're not out there anymore, because they're not running for president, but they are still writing up laws and trying to pass bills and trying to change what's going on in our life. You know, really felt like in the beginning I believed in Donald Trump and I believed in Q, and I thought this was great, everything's going to be great, and I absolutely trusted the plan. But now that I see just how deep it goes and how all the underworkings are, like I said, with the governors, everything going on without you knowing it. The other thing I was going to say was the purchasing power that people are losing because the dollar keeps dropping. And I thought about this when you were talking about the 50% increase. So we have to look at value versus price. The price is going to change, but the value remains the same, the value of owning a firearm. And one of the ways I encourage people to consider having better purchasing power is putting their dollars into gold and silver so you can buy more expensive things. It's a bit of a two-edged sword, though, because as you buy them at this expensive price, you're now actually donating to their research against gun ownership. So it's almost like we might end up doing black market buys and sells ourselves. Who knows? I'm not talking about you or me or anybody in particular. I'm saying, but people in general might start considering buying them illegally from then on if they're going to, one, not want to have to pay that price, or two, not want to have to give that money towards even worse laws. But you think of all the violent music videos, it's amazing that people don't wonder about gun violence, and then, or the people do wonder about gun violence and why we have gun violence, but then they go listen to, if you go to the what's trending on YouTube, which of course is not fun, but it's a good idea to kind of see sometimes. And somebody mentioned Jeremiah Cohen earlier, great person who covers trending music. And it's a lot of rap and hip hop talking about killing people just because they disagree, or killing them just because they hit on their girlfriend, and how good it feels. And it just demonic, and in gun violence and other kinds of violence and sex. And, I'm at risk of sounding like, I never thought I'd sound like this, but them kids and that rock and roll, it's really demonic, but they are pushing the gun violence themselves. And yet they're the ones that want to stand up. I mean, they've got it in their movies, they've got it in their music, and yet they want to stand up and say, well, we want to end this gun violence. It's horrible. Also, it's really the irony of it when celebrities are giving donations of their money to bail out anyone arrested under protest, but the mainstream media is saying that the protesters are like right-wing Nazis, and the right wing are saying it's left-wing Antifa. And somebody even put out a video. I'm not a fan of Alex Jones whatsoever. In fact, I really think he's a double agent of some kind. But they're putting out stuff that that InfoWars or whatever, Alex Jones was the ones that set some fire somewhere when it wasn't. Anyway, it's just crazy, the irony of it, and sometimes it can make your head spin, and sometimes it's really frustrating. And along the lines of the irony is that everybody's cheering Trump and his martial law and saving the children. Meanwhile, we have people like Governor Little suspending laws so that they can have their emergency quarantine camps for children. And by the way, what happened with that video when they were posted for job openings for these specific facilities where they were going to have these, there was such an uproar about it that they pulled it down, and they said, oh, that was a mistake. We were intended for that to be public. And so they're actually admitting now that they meant to have these facilities as the places, but it was never meant to be public. And they probably do still have job openings. And meanwhile, Governor Little has suspended these laws. So like you said, it's part of the trafficking. So if Donald Trump is saving children from the tunnels during coronavirus, but now that we're in the riots, they're suspending laws so they can put children in internment camps. What's the point of saving? Maybe they saved them from the tunnels, but now they're going to put them back in the internment camps. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say about all that.
Yeah, the whole thing with the persecution of these children, even like with the immigrant children, how they were separated from their mothers and fathers, and they were put into these internment camps as well, in these immigration detention facilities. That's just not right. And never has this ever been done before. And where's the outrage? I mean, these kids being separated from their mothers and fathers, and their parents being deported, and they don't have any idea or any measures of safety or some loved one coming in to take care of them, to look after them. That's just not right. And again, another aspect of what we are talking about with this particular. And, again, is it part of the whole organized thing of, that they are trafficking kids as far as the elites of the world? Is it part of that agenda? Who knows? But certainly it's not right to separate kids from their family members just because their parents may be illegal immigrants. I mean, if you're going to deport them, then deport them as a family, in my mind, because it would be better for them to be together than to be separated and left to the whims of, this kind of ICE immigration system.
That was another thing that he was suspending in the laws of Idaho, was also suspending parents the right to visit their children, and suspending their right to even have knowledge of their children being taken.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So very similar to kind of what you were saying. And also Idaho and Montana, we're border states. This is why I think it was so important that they had to rig our elections. I know they did, because John Tester should not have won up here. He shouldn't have won. He was way behind. Oh, but then suddenly they found some they counted the last counties, and those counties were liberal. And so he won by a mere 4,000 votes or something after they counted the very last two. They saved the two liberal counties for last. For what? Oh, he's behind. Oh, good thing we have these two liberal counties. Well, we're border states, and even though we're not on the Mexico border, we're on the Canada border, and we know that Trudeau is very much in the pocket of the deep state. It's clear. And so us being a border state, we're very much in need for these Democratic governors, these Democratic congressmen. And we could be the reddest state of all, but they will rig these elections. And so what I'd say about that is not getting upset and not getting exhausted, because we read in Revelation 13 that there will be a wearing of the saints, that the beast should overcome. But we're also called in the book of Jude to persevere. And we're called to pull people out of the fire and to have compassion. And so rather than getting frustrated, let's be super aware, because if you go to that, just in particular to this one, if you go to, what was his name again? Sorry, Ammon Bundy's YouTube, AMMONBUNDY, he talks about what they can do to actually fight these. So if we just want to sit back and go, oh man, it's too much, I'm too exhausted, then it will pass. These things will pass. We will have child internment camps. We will have right-wing internment. We'll have a lot of internment camps. And like I said earlier, that some of this normalization, quote unquote, will actually take out a lot of the activists as well. While they might normalize the sexual promiscuity among children, already, and teach them all these gross things, they're going to get rid of activists because they don't want anyone trying to fight the system.
Things are just getting weirder and weirder. And I mean, I remember when Rob and I, because we do the weekly show on the Genesis and the Enoch, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. And then when all of the coronavirus stuff came on board in just quick capacity too, and everything shut down, all the flights, all the borders, and nobody's let in. People got caught in other parts of the country, unable to get back home. I mean, things are just getting so weird and turning so upside down. It's and then again with the acceleration to the end of days. I mean, it says that in the scriptures that the for the elect's sake the days shall be shortened, and that the days that a single day would be like a single hour like a single minute, and a single minute like a moment. And certainly it seems that things are accelerating, and that an agenda for, I mean, it makes me wonder, well, if everything is moving as quick as things are now, I mean, when's the Antichrist going to come on the scene? Because like I'm fully expecting some kind of major event, some kind of huge, um, as far as a recognition of where we are in the season, for those that, as far as God's people, the children of light that are watching. It's just a matter of, the peace treaty with Israel. If there's a two-state solution, Palestinians being brought into some kind of measure of peace, and then bam, the Antichrist come on the scene, and the two witnesses. I mean, it could be so quickly accelerated. Um, it's just people better get serious about salvation through Christ, in my opinion, because the hour is late, and we don't know when that last few dominoes are gonna click into place and fall, and set everything into conflagration.
Amen. That's right. And I tell my listeners that we're still here because we have souls that we can still reach. Lost souls are people that can still be saved. And we still also need to protect the remnant of people, like checking each other. In fact, it was funny because if you watch this channel, Black Pill, the Devon Stack, warning, he uses foul language. However, he is so accurate, but he brought up this old Twilight Zone episode where all these people were placating this child, and they had to placate the child because the child had powers, and the child could kill you in an instant. And if you didn't like him, or if you said something he didn't like, or if you did something he didn't want you to do. And the funny part about that is that's kind of, I think about that and I'm like, that's kind of how we're stepping around some of this stuff, and we have to check each other. We can't allow ourselves to say, well, it's okay if so-and-so wants to behave a certain way. And that's a very drastic comparison, but people aren't going to burn us down. Well, they might. It might come to that. If we say something they don't like, it may end our life. And so I don't think we should be afraid to step out and still check each other as the remnant, so that we wouldn't lose anybody, but even for those who are lost. And it does say in Jude to have compassion for some. And that is really hard in these times because they call us names. I think we're crazy, stupid, but we are still here. Jesus hasn't come back yet because there's souls to be saved. And even if it's going to be tomorrow, or not for 2 years, or not in our lifetime, we're supposed to still be working. And when he returns, we're supposed to be doing his purpose for us, and not, I don't think we should be doing too much work on the day, the time, and the hour, which can be fun. It can be interesting. And some of the other stuff I look into, certainly fun and interesting. But the real work is bringing the truth to people and trying to, hopefully, if they don't know Jesus, to offer a paradigm shift for them in a way that will bring them to Jesus. And if they do know Jesus, to be willing to continue to check each other with love and humility.
Yeah, and what I'm finding too is that with the heaviness of all of these issues and all of these topics and all of what's going on in the world, that we have to also take moments to recognize the blessings of each day, and that we have to really still find joy and still find, um, time to laugh and time to be with our friends and our families and our loved ones, and to share memories like that, because things can get overwhelming. And even though myself, I work out of the house, and this whole transition with regard to the COVID virus and all that hasn't been devastating for me, um, just because, again, I do and have worked out of my house for a very long time and still continue to do so. But for those that, have lost their livelihoods, and for families that both parents may have been working in industries that are decimated by the whole thing of the stoppage and what we see of the economic crisis. These are very desperate times. And so I think, we have to also remember to pray for each other, and to assist where we can, to aid and help out where we can those that are struggling. And certainly prayer is something that is free, and something that doesn't take a lot of effort to do. And I think that as a world, we don't utilize enough the power of prayer, or to share it freely with the world in the manner that we could. And that really is the least that we can do for each other and one another, is to pray for um, each of us as we continue on our journey, hopefully to awakening and to prioritizing the kingdom. I pray that all the people that are out there that are lost and struggling, that at least they come to a relationship with God, and to learn to lean upon the Most High for, the things of this world.
As far as prayer goes, I am happy to pray with people. I wish more people would take me up on this offer, even if you don't know me. I've told people you can email me at ladyliberty@countermail.com, and I will either pray with you or pray for you on my own. But if you are even so willing, I will call you and pray with you about whatever you need. And I do stop and pray. When I say I'm praying, I stop and pray right in the moment. I used to think that was a lot of work, and it's crazy because it's so easy to just stop what I'm doing and pray. And I love what it's showing my children. In fact, my car had a problem that I fixed today. I'm grateful it was a pretty simple fix. But before I fixed it, the car would just turn off, the power would go off, and it would stop in the street. And the other day we had a hard time getting it restarted. And my daughter, once it started, my daughter goes, I was praying that would happen, and the Lord answered our prayers. And I was like, and I just said, oh, thank you for praying. And so she made it a habit to pray for our car. And now that the part is fixed,
That's awesome.
It's so great, because thanks to Jesus, he's changed me. And I'll just say this real quick, and we're getting close, but I want to say this real quick. Somebody asked me today how I know God is real. And I said, well, when I surrendered my will, he changed me. And the change is from him, and to watch my children see it is from him. Amen. But I'm so glad he's using me. And so it really does work. Everything works when you surrender your will. But praying for each other is absolutely enormous, because it does change things for God to see our desire for him. And when we pray for his angels to work on our behalf, and that's what I've been praying for my city, is that the Lord's angels would come with their swords of fire to protect the city, and in case of any violence, whether it's Antifa or protesters or anything that's going on. So again, I'll offer that one more time. I will pray for you if you want. My email is ladyliberty@countermail.com. I'll type it real quick, but I would do that for anyone that needed it anytime.
Awesome. And thank you for doing so. And likewise, we also we have a digital readers club every Saturday, and we get together afterwards, after doing our study, to pray for each other and one another. And I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to do that for people, and And so those of you that would like, you can feel free to join us, our DRC, through our YouTube and Discord channel. And we do a study every week where we're reading right now from the Yahushua Christ, the Infancy Gospels. And then we have these moments of prayer where we are praying for each other and families and loved ones and our animals and pets and and the world and nation. So join us if you can. Just wanted to remind everybody, tomorrow night I will be on with Kingdom in Context, and we will be doing a debate on serpent seeds. So should be an interesting show, 9 to 11 p.m. for those of you that can make it. We'll catch you then. Thanks again, Erin. Be blessed,
Yes,
all.
peace and love of the Lord.
Shalom.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.